A new dawn in America, under the sprawling palm trees and shimmering skyline of Los Angeles, Maria stepped onto American soil for the very first time. The city was a whirlwind of sounds, the constant hum of traffic, snippets of Spanish and English drifting from open restaurant doors, and laughter echoing from playgrounds in the bright California sun. Everything felt surreal to Maria, who had spent her entire life in a small, tight-knit village in Central America. The vastness of the United States was both thrilling and intimidating.
That's a great idea.
Maria arrived with one suitcase, a faded photograph of her family back home, and a heart full of dreams. She rented a modest room in a building that buzzed with life from fellow immigrants, each person with their own hopes for the future, their own stories of struggle and survival. The city, with its glitzy promise of opportunity, was a far cry from the simple comforts she once knew. Yet Maria felt hope bloom inside her chest as she watched the morning light filter through the blinds each day. Her early mornings began with the aroma of strong coffee brewing in the shared kitchen, as neighbors exchanged greetings in a patchwork of accents and languages. Maria found work as a cleaner in a downtown office by day and as a waitress in a local diner by night. She sent home what money she could, sometimes sacrificing her own comfort for the sake of her parents and siblings. It was not just the necessity of survival that powered Maria. It was the deep-seated belief that she could build something beautiful and secure in this new world. On weekends, she explored the city with eyes wide open. From the Latino murals in Boyle Heights to the glitzy boardwalk of Santa Monica, Maria soaked in every shade of American life. The diversity, the energy, and even the challenges gave her new perspective. Her greatest joy, however, came the day she met Daniel, a kind-hearted construction worker with roots in Mexico, but a soul completely at home in America. Together, they dreamed of raising a family, of giving their children the chance to grow up in a place where dreams really could come true. Though their apartment was small, it was filled with gentle laughter, late-night talks about their homeland, and plans for the future. It wasn't always easy. Far from it. Some days, homesickness gnawed at her spirit, and the language barrier made even simple errands feel impossible. Maria faced moments of deep loneliness and self-doubt, but each sunrise in Los Angeles reminded her of the promise she made to herself, to keep moving forward, to stay strong for the family she would someday build, and to let every challenge make her wiser. In those golden moments of the early morning, as she watched the dawn break over the city's endless horizon, Maria felt the weight of possibility. A new life was just beginning. Not perfect, not without fear, but rich with hope. She was ready to embrace every joy and hardship the American dream could offer. An unexpected darkness falls. For several years, Maria believed she had finally found her footing in America. Her small family with Daniel blossomed as they navigated the challenges of daily life, sometimes scraping by, but always holding on to one another. Their evenings were filled with laughter, simple homemade meals, and stories about their childhoods in distant countries. The apartment was cramped, but it was filled with the warmth of their dreams and the gentle hope that life would keep getting better. But then, without warning, everything shattered. One morning, Maria awoke to an icy tension in the air. An argument erupted, one far more intense than any before. And suddenly, she became the center of anger and accusation. Daniel's family, who had previously shown only distant politeness, now turned cold and suspicious. Out of nowhere, Maria was accused of a serious mistake, something she knew in the depths of her soul she could never have done. The details of the accusation shifted each time it was retold, growing murkier and more impossible to defend against. Shock and heartbreak washed over her as Daniel, caught between loyalty and confusion, failed to stand up for her. Alone in a room of voices raised against her, Maria struggled to understand how everything had gone so wrong. She pleaded her innocence, but received only doubtful looks in return. The privacy of her home, a sanctuary she had built with such patience and sacrifice, became a place of whispers and side glances. The pressure to leave grew unbearable. Daniel's parents insisted it would be best for everyone if Maria took their young son, Jake, and moved out. The pain was indescribable. Maria had crossed oceans for the promise of family, and now faced the crushing reality of displacement once more. But this time in a country where she barely had anyone else to turn to. Packing was a quiet, wrenching process. She gathered Jake's toys and clothes, trying not to let him see her trembling hands. The smallest comforts, the photograph from her childhood, a note Daniel had once written her, Jake's favorite blanket, were carefully tucked into a worn suitcase. As she walked out the door for the last time, Maria glanced back and saw nothing of the home she once knew, only walls and shadows, echoing with heartbreak. Stepping onto the busy Los Angeles sidewalk, clutching Jake's tiny hand, Maria was engulfed by waves of fear and uncertainty. The city, which once dazzled her, now seemed overwhelming. Each noise and stranger, a reminder of how alone she had become. For Jake's sake, she swallowed her tears, whispering words of reassurance she herself struggled to believe. Yet inside, shame and rage simmered. She had been wronged, cast aside, and denied the right to even explain herself. That night, in a crowded shelter among other women and children facing their own struggles, Maria lay awake listening to Jake's soft breaths. The darkness felt heavier than ever, but somewhere within her grief, a quiet spark remained, a knowledge that she owed it to her son and herself to fight for truth. The pain was still fresh, but so was a hidden resolve. Maria would not let this unjust accusation define her story. And so, as the first hints of dawn crept through the thin curtains, Maria began to imagine not just survival, but the courage to stand up for herself, no matter what lay ahead. A solitary journey. The sun filtered weakly through the faded curtains of Maria's new one-room apartment, a far cry from the modest comfort she'd carved out in her previous home. But it was a roof for herself and Jake. Their first days in this unfamiliar place passed in a blur. The walls felt thinner, the noises more intrusive. Maria would lie awake long into the night, listening to the distant wail of sirens and the restless movements of neighbors coming and going at all hours. She felt the weight of her new reality pressing down with each sunrise. Maria was now not just an immigrant, not just a woman without family nearby, but a single mother. Her little boy's only constant in a world that had upended itself overnight. Learning to survive. The first challenge was finding a way to survive. With the little money she had saved, Maria managed to pay the first month's rent and buy groceries for Jake. Every penny was accounted for. Apples and milk for Jake's breakfast, cans of beans and rice for their dinners, barely a treat in between. Maria ate sparingly, telling herself her own hunger would fuel a fiercer determination. Finding work as a single mother was not easy. She returned to cleaning offices in the early mornings, leaving Jake in a neighbor's care for a few dollars an hour, then picked up shifts at a local laundromat, folding mountains of strangers' clothes, her own hands chapped from chemicals and water. Evenings were spent hurrying home in darkness, clutching bags of discount groceries, always worried about making ends meet. On weekends, When she wasn't working, Maria visited local community centers, searching for hand-me-down clothes or subsidized daycare programs. Facing prejudice and isolation, Maria quickly discovered that being a single immigrant mother in Los Angeles came with layers of invisibility and stigma. In line at government offices, she felt eyes linger on her dark hair, her well-worn shoes, the broken English she spoke when she had to. Some neighbors were kind, but distant. Others offered advice in quick, hushed tones, warning her about the dangers of the city, the importance of locking her doors, the risk of calling too much attention. At the park, with Jake, she sometimes caught quiet glances from mothers chatting in groups. Alone, she'd sit on the bench, watching Jake climb the faded playground, teaching him gently to speak up, to share, to believe that he belonged, even when she herself wasn't sure. But Maria was determined never to show her exhaustion to Jake. To him, she painted every day as an adventure. Let's see what games you learn at the park today. Or maybe one day we'll visit the beach when you're bigger. She tucked away her pain and made each evening warm, singing lullabies from her childhood as she braided his dark hair or told him stories about faraway lands. The strength of a mother's love. Maria's greatest anchor was her deep, unwavering love for Jake. Watching him sleep, his fear sometimes visible in the way he clutched his old teddy bear, Maria's resolve only hardened. She promised herself that Jake would not grow up feeling unwanted or less than. She began speaking English with him more often, determined to help him blend in at preschool and make friends. At night, she whispered that he was brave, that he was smart, that together they could weather any storm. Their bond deepened as they relied on each other for comfort and routine. Small rituals, sharing hot chocolate on chilly mornings, celebrating every little milestone at school, drawing colorful crayon pictures to hang on the peeling walls, wove a sense of home out of uncertainty. Reaching out for help. Despite her pride, Maria knew she could not do this alone forever. On a friend's advice, she reached out to a local immigrant support group. The weekly meetings became a lifeline, a place where she met women with stories as painful and resilient as her own. Some had crossed deserts, others had fled violence or poverty. All knew what it meant to be uprooted. All understood the ache of missing home. The support group taught Maria how to navigate certain bureaucratic challenges, how to advocate for Jake at school, how to apply for childcare and medical benefits she didn't realize she qualified for, and how to stand up for herself, even when she wanted to disappear. She learned to fill out job applications online and tailor her resume for better positions. A volunteer lawyer spoke to the group about women's legal rights in America, planting the first seeds of hope that justice might be possible, even for someone in her circumstances. Through these experiences, Maria discovered not only practical resources, but also emotional strength. She saw how the women encouraged one another, sharing food, babysitting one another's children, pooling their knowledge about safe neighborhoods and affordable groceries. It was a small but powerful sense of solidarity, one that lifted Maria even on her hardest days. The pain of estrangement. Despite finding support, Maria sometimes faced cruel judgment and exclusion. There were people, even within immigrant communities, who whispered about her broken marriage, who pitied Jake for not growing up with both parents. When Daniel occasionally called to speak to his son, Maria kept the conversations cordial, though the pain stirred inside her. She had once dreamed of giving Jake a family with love at its center. Now, she worked to make sure her son felt secure and protected, no matter how others saw their family. Holidays were particularly hard. As Christmas approached, Maria watched families gather with relatives, sharing gifts and laughter across long tables. She and Jake made do with decorations, fashioned from colored paper, and a tiny artificial tree, salvaged from a thrift store. Yet in these moments, Maria focused on gratitude, for shelter, for food, for her son's laughter. Fragile, yes, but genuine. Glimmers of hope. As the months passed, Maria grew less fearful and more resourceful. She took on small sewing jobs in the evenings, lining up mended clothes for customers who paid cash. She saved every spare dollar, determined to build a cushion against the next emergency. At Jake's preschool parent meetings, she dared to introduce herself, finding her English slowly improving, her confidence rising little by little. Jake began to thrive, too. He made friends, came home with stories of finger painting and songs, his bright curiosity helping Maria see the beauty in their ongoing journey. Whenever Maria faltered, Jake's hugs, his trust in her, reminded her what she was fighting for, a woman transformed. Over time, Maria realized she was no longer the uncertain newcomer she once was. She was a survivor, a mother whose love took the shape of courage each day. She didn't know what the future held, but she knew that as long as she and Jake faced it together, nothing could break the spirit they had built. Their hardships refined them, teaching resourcefulness, empathy, and grit. Maria stopped thinking of herself only as a victim of circumstance. She began to believe that perhaps her story couldn't just be about suffering and endurance, but about purpose and transformation. And so, step by determined step, Maria moved forward, lonely sometimes, but never truly alone, because of the little hand she held each morning as a new day began in America. Secrets from the past. As the weeks turned into months, Maria learned to navigate the boundaries of her new life, working, caring for Jake, connecting with fellow immigrants, and slowly regaining a sense of self. Yet, even as she adapted, a haunting uncertainty lingered, a feeling that something about her abrupt expulsion from Daniel's family was left unsaid. Little things would prick her memory. Quickly hushed phone calls Daniel had once received, or the way his parents' eyes would dart uneasily whenever certain letters or bills arrived in the mail. At first, Maria tucked these observations away as mere anxiety. After all, as an outsider, wasn't she always the last to know? But as Jake grew and the custody arrangements remained informal and tense, Maria's sense of unease deepened. She noticed that every time Daniel's family contacted her, usually with clipped directives about Jake's well-being or awkwardly offered financial assistance, the subject of their previous life together was strictly off-limits. When Maria asked about closing joint accounts or tried to retrieve personal belongings left at the old apartment, she was met with deflections, excuses, and occasional veiled threats. One gray Saturday afternoon, while Jake napped on their worn couch, Maria sat at the little thrift store table, sorting through the folder of paperwork she'd managed to keep over the years. She leafed through old bank statements, medical bills, tax forms, and letters in both English and Spanish. Her curiosity, fed by months of suspicion, became something sharper, a determination to understand why everything in her life had been so quickly and utterly upended. A chance conversation. The catalyst came unexpectedly. One day, in the waiting room of a local clinic, Maria struck up a conversation with Mrs. Stevens, an elderly neighbor who'd once known Daniel's family fairly well. The conversation meandered through pleasantries and sympathy for Maria's struggles, eventually touching lightly on Daniel's parents' long-standing involvement in local business. Mrs. Stevens hinted at past legal troubles, mentioning in passing that she'd overheard talk years ago about inheritance disputes in warring siblings. Maria's heart pounded with a strange excitement. Could her sudden expulsion have been about more than a family quarrel? She thanked Mrs. Stevens, her mind beginning to work through the implications with newfound resolve, piecing the puzzle together. Over the next several weeks, Maria began to pay closer attention to every detail involving Daniel's family. She scrolled through old text messages, checked back on family emails, and compared names and dates from public records she could access online. The inconsistencies added up. Unexplained withdrawals from joint accounts, messages about keeping things quiet, unexplained paperwork Daniel once asked her to sign without explanation. There were a couple of checks Maria remembered him depositing and not explaining, transfers between accounts that never made sense, and at least one conversation she'd half overheard involving Daniel's brother in talk of protecting the estate. Maria's world had always been practical, grounded in the daily urgency of survival. Now, though, she became a detective for her own life. She visited the public library, learning how to search for property records and court filings. She sought advice from her support group, discovering that more than one member had faced legal intimidation over family assets or child custody. These stories urged her forward. This was not just her story. It was a pattern in the shadows of immigrant life, a web of deceit. One day, Maria received a letter that crystallized her suspicion. The envelope, addressed to Jake, had been forwarded to her new apartment from their former address. Inside was a notice regarding a trust fund in Jake's name, one Maria had never known existed. Confused, she cross-referenced the letter with other documents and realized that Daniel's family had set up funds, but never informed her, nor allowed her any say over their release. Next, Maria discovered documents indicating that their former apartment, which she had believed belonged to Daniel's uncle, was in fact part of a complicated transfer orchestrated by his parents shortly before she was asked to leave. It appeared the family was consolidating assets, positioning themselves to cut Maria and Jake out of any share, and possibly crafting a narrative to weaken her claim to custody in the future. Enraged, but steadied by purpose, Maria began saving every communication, emails, texts, even voicemail messages from Daniel's parents. She wrote down every timeline she could remember and gathered receipts, photos, copies of signed forms, and testimonies from anyone willing to support her version of events. Taking it to the community, Maria's indignation reached a boiling point at a support group meeting one Tuesday evening. She finally confided in Amanda, a young volunteer attorney who frequently lectured the group about their rights as immigrants and mothers. Amanda listened patiently as Maria explained the tangled web of secrets, withholding judgment, but her eyes narrowed with interest at the mention of the trust fund and property transfers. Unlike Maria, Amanda knew the legal weight concealed behind these transactions. Amanda explained that in cases like these, families would sometimes provoke or frame a spouse, especially someone vulnerable, like a recent immigrant mother, into leaving, then manipulate the narrative around custody and property. If Maria could prove her forced expulsion and show evidence of deceit, she might not only regain legal custody of Jake, but also secure resources for his upbringing. Together over the following weeks, Maria and Amanda began compiling Maria's growing dossier. Amanda advised requesting full financial disclosures and, if necessary, filing a restraining order to ensure Maria's rights as Jake's primary caregiver remained protected. At Amanda's urging, Maria redoubled her efforts, to record every interaction with Daniel's family and reached out to trusted neighbors who had witnessed past incidents. Finding strength in the truth, the investigation was exhausting and at times terrifying. Maria feared retaliation and struggled with guilt. Would her search for justice only escalate the family feud? But each new piece of evidence reinforced her conviction. She owed Jake the truth and the security he deserved. As legal deadlines approached, Maria's days grew longer, balancing work, motherhood, and the labyrinthine demands of her quest for justice. Paranoia sometimes intruded. She checked locks twice before sleeping, memorized Amanda's phone number, and taught Jake to never leave school with anyone but her. Yet she found resilience she had not known she possessed. Nights at the kitchen table turned into quiet, determined research. Company came not from Daniel's family, but from women she'd grown to trust. Other mothers who pooled experience and advice, who knew firsthand what it was to stand alone. A glimmer of hope. By the time Amanda finalized paperwork to submit to the court, Maria no longer recognized the frightened, uncertain woman she'd once been. Now she was a mother who'd fought for the truth, lifted up by her own perseverance and the solidarity of others who had walked before her. It was not the path Maria had envisioned for herself or her child when she first set foot on American soil. But she realized, perhaps for the first time, that even in the shadows, hope could take root and secrets, however well buried, could be brought into the light. Gathering evidence, Maria's journey from suspicion to certainty was neither quick nor easy. As she faced the daunting task of collecting evidence to prove her innocence and secure a future for her son, every step demanded courage and patience. In a world where so much had been taken away from her with mere words and manufactured narratives, Maria knew that the only way forward was through careful documentation and unwavering persistence. The beginning of the search. The first lesson Maria learned was that evidence is more than just paper. It is memory, voice, and the tiny details that tell the truth when the world tries to obscure it. Guided by Amanda's advice, Maria began her quest. Her apartment became a kind of war room. Thrift store notebooks stacked on the kitchen table, folders filled with everything from rent receipts to grocery lists, old envelopes, and photographs. The hardest part was sifting through emotional pain while keeping a cool, analytical mindset. Grief surfaced every time Maria found a piece of Jake's artwork from their old home, or a note from Daniel in happier times. But Maria refused to let nostalgia cloud her judgment. She compartmentalized, setting aside time every evening to sit at the table after Jake fell asleep, to go over every scrap of information she had. Collecting documents, Amanda had been very specific. To challenge Daniel's family, Maria would need to prove not just that she had been forced out unjustly, but also that there were irregularities with money, property, and legal arrangements. So, Maria started by tracing her old records, bank statements that showed withdrawals she hadn't authorized, joint account changes, and strange gaps in time where money seemed to vanish. She compared timelines, aligning withdrawal dates to days when she knew Daniel or his family were setting up meetings to discuss family business. Maria also gathered all medical and school documents connected to Jake. Every registration form, immunization record, and report card mattered. Daniel's parents had sometimes tried to change Jake's primary contact to themselves. By showing the sequence of custody changes, Maria could demonstrate that Daniel's family was attempting to marginalize her role as mother. She made copies of every lease and rental receipt for their past apartments, sometimes walking miles to former landlords or property managers to request statements verifying her residency. Some were sympathetic, others less so, but Maria made sure to thank each person who was willing to help her reconstruct the thread of her life. Recording conversations. One of Amanda's most important instructions was to create a record of every significant interaction, especially with Daniel and his family. Maria learned to keep a written log. She would scribble quick notes after each call, noting times, dates, the nature of the conversation, and even her emotional state. When she was able, she politely asked that all discussions happen over text or email. For clarity's sake, she would say, so nothing could be twisted or denied later. There were tense afternoons when Daniel's mother would show up at Jake's preschool, claiming an emergency, or calls demanding Maria bring Jake to a family event without warning. Maria, though shaken, kept her composure and followed Amanda's protocol, writing down the details immediately, saving messages, and even asking staff at the preschool to record incidents in their logs. It felt strange to be so diligent, but Maria reminded herself this was how she could stand against whispered accusations and manipulation. Seeking witnesses. Another vital piece of evidence was human testimony. Maria did not have a large social network. Her life had been work, home, and the tight bubble of Daniel's family. Still, she reached out to people she knew, an old neighbor who'd watch Jake in the afternoons, a supermarket cashier who had often seen Maria shop alone with her son, a friend from the support group who had witnessed one of Daniel's parents berate her in public. These witnesses may not have seen the worst moments, but their memories provided crucial context. Each person wrote short statements, some hesitant at first, but Amanda reassured them that they were simply describing what they had observed. Their stories helped construct a pattern. Maria, as Jake's primary caregiver, her exclusion from family decisions, and her respectful but constant efforts to co-parent. Gathering digital evidence, Maria never considered herself tech-savvy, but Amanda showed her how to download her phone records, retrieve old emails, and even access location history on her phone, which showed her physical proximity to Jake's school, to former homes, and to support group meetings. They printed out threads of text messages where Daniel's family pressured Maria or threatened to change custody. She also recreated her social media activity, pulling up photos and posts that documented holidays, daily routines, and parent-teacher meetings, all to illustrate her presence as a consistent, loving force in Jake's life. Uncovering hidden transactions. The trust fund in Jake's name loomed large. With Amanda's help, Maria filed formal requests for information at the bank. It was slow and at times humiliating. Maria had to prove her identity again and again, only to be told information was restricted. But Amanda persisted, invoking legal codes, and eventually filing a petition in family court to force disclosures. The property transfer was even murkier. Amanda explained how American property law worked, how deeds could be shuffled or held in trust to obscure true ownership. Together, they filed public records requests at the county clerk's office, sometimes waiting for hours, only to find that Daniel's family had acted swiftly to minimize paper trails. Still, Amanda encouraged Maria to look for discrepancies. Lease payment stubs, home repair bills addressed to her, and even photos of Jake in the apartment, time-stamped with the date, balancing work, motherhood, and the fight for justice. All the while, Maria continued to work grueling hours and care for Jake. There were evenings when the daunting heap of paperwork nearly drowned her hope, but she remembered Amanda's quiet words. The strongest cases are built by people who refuse to give up. Jake knew little of the adult world's battles. To him, the stacks of paper on their kitchen table were just part of the grown-up routine. Maria protected his innocence, tucking him in at night and promising that Mommy will always fight for you. The ritual of bedtime stories became a meditation for Maria, reminding her, through each fantastical tale, of the hero's journey she herself had unwittingly joined. On rare nights when loneliness closed in, Maria reread the statements from her supporters. She found comfort knowing she was not standing entirely alone. Her small circle, Amanda, a few friends, and the women from the support group anchored her resolve, laying the groundwork for a new chapter. In time, Maria's war room began to look less like a place of chaos and more like a command center. Each piece of evidence was filed, labeled, cross-referenced, a map to help reclaim her voice in a system that had tried to erase it. It was exhausting, sometimes demoralizing, but Maria pressed onward, holding fast to the dream that someday soon, justice would catch up to the truth. She knew that the coming courtroom battle would test every ounce of strength she had left. But she also believed that every page she filled and every witness she found brought her and Jake one step closer to the safety and fairness that had drawn her to America in the first place. The battle in the courtroom. The courthouse loomed large in Maria's imagination, long before she first stepped inside its cream-colored stone walls. As the date of the trial approached, anxiety clung to her, sometimes making sleep impossible. Yet beneath the fear ran a relentless current of determination. The knowledge that after months of doubt, isolation, investigation, and resilience, she was at last going to face her accusers, defend herself, and fight for her son's future in a public forum where, she hoped, truth still mattered. The eve of the trial. The night before the hearing, Maria sat at her scarred kitchen table, reviewing a neat stack of folders Amanda had helped prepare. Each folder was color-coded and carefully labeled: financial records, school documents, signed affidavits, timelines, and digital correspondence. All painstakingly collected evidence of her innocence and parental devotion. Jake was tucked into bed early, unaware of the storm that would play out in court the next day. Maria prayed silently, clutching her son's well-loved blanket for comfort, and found herself repeating, "This is for you, Jake. I will not be afraid." Sleep, when it finally came, was shallow and broken by anxious dreams. Maria saw herself sitting in an endless waiting room, her name never called, her voice lost in a sea of strangers. But dawn came soon. The city bathed in cool gold, and determination filled her anew. Entering the arena, the courthouse that morning buzzed with activity. The rhythmic clack of dress shoes on marble floors, the low rumble of voices, security guards ushering people through metal detectors. Amanda arrived early, calm and businesslike, carrying her own small mountain of documents in a well-worn leather satchel. Despite the nerves in her stomach, Maria drew strength from Amanda's presence. In the waiting room, Maria took deep, steadying breaths. She watched other families, some whispering urgently, others trembling, some seemingly numb with fear. For the first time, Maria felt part of a larger struggle, recognizing the silent, shared terror and hope in the faces around her. When their case was called, Maria felt Amanda's gentle hand squeeze hers. "You know the truth. Let it guide you," she whispered. The proceedings begin. The courtroom was austere. Rows of wooden benches, an American flag hanging behind the judge's bench, the air cold and formal. At one side sat Daniel, with his parents and their sharply dressed lawyer. On the other, Maria and Amanda. It was the first time Maria had seen Daniel in months. He looked gaunt, his eyes avoiding hers, and her heart ached at the memory of their love and the gulf now yawning between them. Opening statements set the tone. Daniel's family's attorney painted Maria as unreliable, claiming she had abandoned her family, was unfit to parent Jake, and had no right to financial assets or custody given her immigrant status and supposed instability. Maria's muscles tightened with each accusation, but she met the judge's gaze with dignity, her jaw set. When Amanda spoke for the defense, her voice was steady and direct. She outlined the evidence that Maria had been forced out under duress, that Daniel's family had manipulated events, and that the legal and financial records told a story of exclusion and concealment, not neglect. She promised to demonstrate, point by point, Maria's central and loving role in Jake's life. Testimonies and cross-examinations. Witness after witness was called. Daniel's mother and father painted a portrait of Maria as difficult, unwilling to fit in, prone to emotional outbursts, and neglectful of her responsibilities. On cross-examination, Amanda methodically brought out inconsistencies. She produced text messages in which Maria begged for mediation rather than separation, emails where Daniel's mother threatened Maria with losing Jake if she didn't comply. Maria's neighbors, former employers, and friends from the support group testified in her defense. A soft-spoken neighbor described Maria's careful routines with Jake, walking him to school every day, reading to him each night. A laundromat manager spoke of Maria's reliability and honesty, her willingness to work any shift to support her son. Other immigrant mothers described her generosity, her participation in group meetings, and her constant concern for Jake's well-being, even as she herself struggled. The judge listened closely. Sometimes she asked clarifying questions about legal documents, the trust fund, or unexplained account withdrawals. Amanda presented clear, dated evidence, the bank statements, forwarded letters, copies of apartment leases, and official records showing Maria's unbroken presence in Jake's life. Maria's stand eventually. It was Maria's turn to testify. She rose, heart pounding, every muscle taut. With Amanda beside her, she faced the court. She recounted her journey to America, her commitment to building a loving family, her heartbreak when the accusations mounted without explanation, her struggle to survive and fight for Jake alone. Tears welled up, but did not fall. She described the sleepless nights, the hunger and fear, the hope she clung to for Jake's sake. She answered questions forthrightly, admitting where her English faltered or her paperwork was incomplete, but always returning to her unwavering love for her child. Under questioning from Daniel's family's lawyer, Maria felt the old shame and anger rising. Accusations of being a bad influence, of not understanding American ways. But Amanda's objections were firm when attacks strayed into xenophobia or irrelevance, and the judge responded with stern reminders to keep discourse respectful and factual. Amanda's closing argument. When the time came for closing arguments, Amanda stood tall, her conviction unshakable. She appealed to the judge's sense of fairness and the fundamental rights of both mothers and children. She argued that Maria's case was not just a family dispute, but a test of the court's commitment to justice, of whether an immigrant woman with fewer resources and less power could be heard without prejudice and protected from manipulation. Amanda emphasized that raising a child alone does not make one unfit. Instead, Maria's sacrifices, working multiple jobs, seeking help, never faltering in affection or responsibility, showed her strength. Amanda asked the court to recognize the calculated effort by Daniel's family to expel Maria and erase her from Jake's life, and to restore to Maria the dignity and rights she deserved. The verdict time seemed to suspend as the judge deliberated, reviewing documents, notes, and testimonies. Maria sat frozen, her hands clasped so tightly her knuckles whitened. The room was silent, but for the faint ticking of a clock. Finally, the judge read her decision. She acknowledged the complexity of the case, noting the evidence of manipulation in the credible, consistent testimony about Maria's love and care for Jake. She ruled in Maria's favor, restoring full custody to Maria, ordering the managed release of Jake's trust fund for his benefit, and admonishing Daniel's family for their coercive actions.
Good.
Tears streamed down Maria's cheeks. Relief, vindication, and exhaustion folding into one. Amanda squeezed her hand in triumph. Fellow support group members in the gallery breaking into quiet cheers. Daniel looked haunted, his parents deflated. But Maria felt only sadness for what was lost and gratitude for what was saved. Aftermath. Maria walked from the court into the bright Los Angeles afternoon, Jake running to her, arms open. She felt the city's noises and the world return. This chapter of fear and struggle was over. With justice finally on her side, Maria carried her son into a future she had earned, one built not only on hope, but on the hard-won foundation of truth and courage. Light after the storm. When the gavel fell and the verdict was read, it was as if the world itself exhaled. Maria left the courthouse behind, the stone and glass of that once intimidating building, now distant monuments to what she had endured and overcome. For the first time in years, the sun on her face felt warm and welcoming instead of indifferent. The chaotic hum of Los Angeles seemed to sing of possibility, not threat. Jake ran to her with open arms, and in that embrace, the future finally felt like something precious, something she owned rather than simply survived. Returning home, the quiet healing. The first days after the courtroom battle felt surreal. Every morning, Maria woke up expecting anxiety to seize her chest, as it always had. But instead, she found herself basking in a gentle, unaccustomed calm. It was a new kind of peace. Fragile, yes, but real, woven from relief, validation, and the slow understanding that justice had taken her side at last. Their apartment, which for so long had been filled with tension and fear, subtly transformed. Maria bought a small bouquet of yellow wildflowers, placing them in a jar by the window. Jake laughed more easily, less watchful, no longer flinching at every loud noise or unexpected knock at the door. Each evening, as dusk crept in, they lingered over dinner, sharing stories, making simple plans, and discovering new rituals of warmth and safety. Rebuilding their lives, liberation did not mean luxury. Maria knew hardship was not behind them. Her job prospects were still modest, and the cost of rent, daycare, food, and emergencies required strict budgeting and sacrifice. But now, these challenges were faced with dignity and some real support. The court's decision ensured that Jake's trust fund would cover his educational needs and part of their living expenses. For the first time, Maria didn't have to choose between buying shoes for her growing child or paying the electricity bill. She devoted careful attention to planning a future for both of them. She made time to help Jake with his homework, sometimes struggling alongside him as she worked to improve her own English. On weekends, they would visit the local park, eat slices of melon, or splurge on ice cream trucks that rattled through dusty streets. The smallest pleasures, Jake's drawings taped to the refrigerator, a shared nap on a lazy Sunday became private celebrations of how far they had come. Embracing community again, Maria's victory in court gave her newfound confidence, not just for herself, but for others who shared her struggles. She returned to the Immigrant Women's Support Group, this time as a mentor and friend, rather than a frightened newcomer. She listened compassionately to stories of recent arrivals, stories filled with heartbreak, dreams, and doubts echoing her own. She spoke gently, never offering false hope, but reminding them that resilience and collective support were real forces, that she was living proof. With Amanda's encouragement, Maria began volunteering herself, translating documents for other immigrants, advocating for women at legal clinics, and sometimes accompanying nervous mothers on their own first trips to court. Her story spread. Neighbors called her courageous, children eyed her with admiration, and among single mothers and survivors, Maria's name became a quiet touchstone, a reminder that standing up for truth was possible, even when the odds seemed insurmountable. Jake's blossoming. For Jake, the transformation was profound. Gone were the days of anxious stares and hesitant speech at school. He began to thrive, making friends and throwing himself into new experiences with gusto, painting, soccer, singing in the preschool chorus. He told Maria he wanted to be a superhero when he grew up, someone who helped people and fixed things that were broken. Watching him, Maria found herself healed in ways she hadn't expected. His laughter was a daily affirmation of her choices, a living testament to the strength of a mother's devotion. On parent-teacher nights, Maria walked into the school with her head held higher, grateful not just for Jake's progress, but for the acceptance she felt from the staff and other parents facing the past with new eyes. Though the wounds Daniel's family left could not be erased, Maria found herself increasingly able to look at that chapter with perspective instead of pain. She forgave Daniel, not out of weakness, but because anger had become a burden she refused to carry. She stopped recoiling at the thought of his betrayal, recognizing that he too was lost, a product of fear and manipulation as much as malice. For Jake's sake and her own, Maria kept the lines of communication open, even as she protected her hard-won boundaries. When holidays came, she invited neighbors and friends from the support group to their apartment, filling the space with laughter, stories, and food that recalled their varied homelands. Maria and Jake made new traditions, baking sweetbread together, assembling decorations from scraps, and celebrating not what they had lost, but all they had built. Looking ahead, a sense of purpose. Gradually, Maria began thinking beyond mere survival. She took night classes at the community college, determined to earn her GED and pursue certification as a medical assistant, an opportunity she'd once thought out of reach. Amanda continued to cheer her on, introducing her to community resources, workshops, and women in professional networks who wanted to help. Every exam passed, every new phrase learned, felt like adding another brick to a foundation that no one could ever steal from them. She dreamed now not just of earning a steady income, but of modeling for Jake what it meant to transform hardship into purpose. She wanted her son to remember that their story was not one of defeat, but of perseverance and renewal, a testament to the strength that bloomed in adversity's shadow. An enduring light. Sometimes, Maria would walk Los Angeles streets at dawn, the sky painted in hues of pink and gold, much like the early mornings when her journey began. She would pause and breathe deeply, remembering the girl who stepped off a bus years ago, clutching a suitcase and a dream. The obstacles, the betrayals, the loneliness. They had threatened to break her, but they had also set her on a path toward self-knowledge she never could have anticipated. Now, held aloft by love, community, and justice, Maria recognized that her hardships were not a prelude to despair, but to hope. She knew that there would be more storms, more setbacks, but she saw herself clearly: a survivor, a mother, an advocate, and, perhaps most liberating of all, a woman who believed, against all odds, in the enduring light after the storm. Moving forward, Maria found herself comforting others, not out of mere sympathy, but from a hard-earned wisdom. "The sun always rises again," she would say, brushing a lock of hair from Jake's brow as he drifted to sleep. "And every dawn brings us a little closer to the life we choose for ourselves." In the gentle radiance of her new beginning, Maria finally understood what it meant to belong, not to a place or a person, but to her own story, one marked by hope, love, and unshakable courage.